In the days of old, when myths and legends shaped the world, a young woman falls under the spell of an ancient vampire, a creature who has lived for 1,000 years. Upon discovering she's now married, he swears to turn her life, and the life of her city, into a nightmare unless she reunites with him. Alan, a young girl growing up in the 1980s, calls upon Nosferatu, a malevolent force far beyond her understanding, and strikes a dangerous pact with him. After sealing the deal, the demonic vampire takes advantage of her, strangling her until she's under his complete control. Moments later, she wakes up, realizing it was all just a terrifying dream. Her husband, Thomas, notices her distress and asks what's wrong. Aware she's just woken from a harrowing nightmare, he pulls her into a tight embrace, assuring her there's nothing to fear. Realizing he's running late, he kisses her goodbye and leaves for work. Alone, Alan replays the nightmare in her mind. The year is 1838 in Alemania, and Thomas rushes to meet Knock, who happens to be a lawyer. As Thomas enters the building, he apologizes for his tardiness, but Knock brushes off his apology and instead congratulates him on his recent marriage. Without wasting time, Knock gets straight to business. He explains that he wants Thomas to negotiate a peculiar deal with an elderly count who's interested in purchasing a property in Wisburg. Seeing this as an opportunity for financial stability, Thomas agrees to the deal, agreeing to sell Schloss Grunewald, a crumbling manor in Wisborg, to the mysterious and eccentric Count Orlik. Thomas hurries home to share the news of his upcoming journey with his wife. He reassures her that he's doing this to secure their future, promising that the deal will make them wealthy. He asks her to wait patiently for his return. Alan, however, begs him not to go, revealing that before their wedding, she dreamed of marrying death itself, with nothing but corpses as witnesses. She admits that, as unsettling as it was, she found the dream strangely alluring. Thomas insists he has no choice but to go, explaining that this is his only chance to earn a promotion and make a substantial amount of money. He feels he can't pass up this opportunity. Alan, on the other hand, disagrees with Thomas's decision. To ease her worries, Thomas decides to take Alan to stay at a friend's house while he's away. The next day, he brings her to the luxurious home of his wealthy friend, Friedrich Harding, where she'll remain during his absence. Before leaving, Thomas once again reassures her that her nightmare was just a dream and there's nothing to fear. After sharing a tender moment, they say their goodbyes. But the nightmares don't stop. Instead, Nosferatu tightens his grip on Alan, solidifying the pact she made with him. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, an old man named Herr Knock conducts a ritual, pledging his loyalty as a servant of the Count. Unbeknownst to Thomas, before he left on his journey, Alan had given him her necklace, secretly weaving strands of her hair into it the night before, unintentionally fulfilling one of Nosferatu's dark requirements. Thomas eventually sets off for Orlik's castle in the Carpathian Mountains of Transylvania, leaving Alan in the care of Friedrich Harding and his wife. Shortly after arriving in Transylvania, he's warmly welcomed by the locals. He's initially charmed by the villagers' cheerful demeanor, but without warning, they burst into bizarre, unsettling laughter directed at him. Just then, the village leader steps out, scolding the locals for their rude behavior. Thomas is mocked for his connection to Count Orlik, but he manages to win over the chief by offering a bribe, insisting he only wants to stay the night. While there, an elderly woman hands him a cross, urging him to pray because he'll soon face grave danger. That evening, Thomas observes the villagers parading a young girl on horseback, claiming she's a sacrifice to the Count. Yet, in a gruesome twist, they end up impaling what they call a vampire's corpse with an iron stake. The next morning, Thomas wakes up, convinced it was all a nightmare, until he notices his legs are caked in mud, as though he'd been wandering outside. Shaken but determined to press on, he brushes it off and continues his journey to the castle. On the way, he spots a mysterious carriage and, summoning his courage, climbs aboard. The carriage speeds toward the Count's estate, menacing wolves chasing it from behind. When he arrives, Thomas is greeted by Count Orlik himself, a figure both grotesque and impatient. The Count invites Thomas to dine with him in the castle, where Thomas insists on finalizing the purchase of the property as soon as possible. Over dinner, Thomas cautiously brings up the villagers' stories about a vampire exhumation, but Orlik dismisses it as mere superstition. Though unconvinced, Thomas doesn't dare press further. As he eats, he He accidentally cuts his thumb with a knife. Orlik's eyes fixate on the fresh blood, something he hasn't seen in a long time. Feigning concern, the Count offers to help, but his true intentions are far more sinister. Meanwhile, Ellen desperately tries to warn Anna about the looming danger, but Anna brushes her off, believing Ellen is simply imagining things, perhaps due to loneliness. Back at the castle, Orlik presents Thomas with a strange document written in cryptic occult symbols. He takes Thomas's locket and retrieves the strands of Ellen's hair hidden within it. Orlik then opens a chest filled with gold coins, paying Thomas his agreed commission. Reluctantly, Thomas signs the document. Once the deal is sealed, Thomas requests to return home, thinking his part in this is over. But Orlik coldly informs him that leaving now is impossible. He must stay, whether he likes it or not. Later, Thomas wakes from another nightmare to find a vampire bite on his chest. Overcome with terror, he realizes he's been fed upon and scrambles to find a way out of the castle. But every door is bolted shut. In a panic, he stumbles upon a dark, eerie bunker and cautiously descends the stairs. There, he discovers Orlik sleeping in his coffin. For a moment, Thomas considers leaving quietly, but then he grabs a mallet, resolved to end the horror once and for all. However, Orlik snaps awake in an instant, swiftly defending himself by seizing the weapon. Thomas, overcome with terror, bolts away as Orlik begins to chant an incantation over the strands of Ellen's hair he had taken earlier. As the spell takes hold, Ellen collapses in the other realm, her strength draining away. Back in the castle, Thomas is forced by Orlik's compulsion to unlock the door he had sealed. He trembles violently, paralyzed by fear, unable to resist as Orlik begins to feed on him without mercy. Meanwhile, in Visborg, Ellen falls victim to a strange and sudden illness. Concerned, Friedrich calls for his doctor, Wilhelm, to examine her. Ellen writhes and moans as if in the throes of passion, forcing Wilhelm to sedate her to calm her down. The moment she falls asleep, Thomas awakens abruptly, as if jolted back to life. He tries to flee, but Orlik's wolves chase him to the window, causing him to tumble into the river below. Ellen, now awake, complains of the relentless nightmares haunting her, and tries to warn Friedrich that Thomas might be in grave danger. Friedrich dismisses her concerns, brushing them off as childish fantasies. He reassures her that Thomas will return soon and that she has nothing to fear. As Friedrich leaves to tend to his wife, Ellen begins to cry out, her body shaking as if she's being violated. Elsewhere, a nun gathering wood in the forest stumbles upon Thomas lying half dead on the riverbank. She rescues him and brings him into the church for care. Meanwhile, Dr. Wilhelm admits that Ellen's condition is beyond his expertise. He suggests transferring her case to his mentor, Albin, a brilliant but controversial scientist exiled in Switzerland for his occult beliefs. At the church, the nuns pray over Thomas, and he is eventually freed from the dark spirit that had plagued him. Despite their pleas for him to rest and recover, Thomas insists on returning to Visborg to protect his wife. Meanwhile, Orlik secures passage to Visborg by hiding in a crate filled with grave dirt and plague-infested rats. During the voyage, he kills a crew member, draining their blood to sustain himself. Back in Visborg, Wilhelm and Friedrich arrive at Professor Albin's dilapidated home. Albin initially turns them away, but Wilhelm speaks a few cryptic words that jog Albin's memory. Recognizing Wilhelm, Albin welcomes them and asks why they've come. Wilhelm explains Ellen's worsening condition, and after hearing the details, Albin deduces that she's under the influence of Nosferatu, a demonic vampire who spreads plague. Albin begins treating Ellen, but during the process she becomes fully possessed, and Orlik's presence manifests through her. She loses control, screaming for help. Albin tells Friedrich that Ellen is cursed by a demon, but Wilhelm remains skeptical, attributing her behavior to delusions. Friedrich too doubts Albin's diagnosis, convinced Ellen's symptoms are merely a result of her anxiety over Thomas's absence. Ignoring their skepticism, Albin insists he needs more time to study the demon and its hold on Ellen. Before he leaves, Albin instructs Anna to keep a close watch on Ellen and to alert him immediately if her behavior grows erratic. Meanwhile, Nock is taken to an institution following a wild and gleeful outburst, and both he and Ellen begin to foretell Orlik's imminent arrival. Shortly after Ellen's prophecy, Thomas returns to Visborg. However, after speaking with Ellen, he collapses almost instantly. As this unfolds, guards summon Friedrich to investigate a troubling discovery. They show him Orlik's ship, wrecked on the shore, and warn that its arrival has unleashed a plague of rats upon the town. Orlick soon reaches his destination, where he reunites with his devoted follower, Nock, who eagerly submits to his master's will. Orlick declares that the land will soon tremble with fear at his presence, and not long after, his plague-infested rats overrun Visborg, spreading disease and despair. Ellen stays by Thomas's side as he battles illness. When Anna enters the room, Ellen apologizes for the chaos she's brought upon their family. Meanwhile, Wilhelm and Albin examine a corpse recovered from Orlick's wrecked ship and conclude that the rats themselves are demonic. Albin demands to speak with Nock immediately, but a subordinate reveals that Nock has already escaped. Albin insists they must find him at all costs, convinced this is no ordinary plague. Orlick, meanwhile, chants a dark incantation meant to engulf the land in shadow. Thomas, drenched in sweat, struggles in his sleep, gasping for air as the nightmare of rats continues to haunt him. Elsewhere, Friedrich's children beg Anna not to leave them alone, but she reassures them that everything will be fine. After leaving their room, however, Anna begins to feel as though she's being watched. Moments later, she's startled by Ellen, who behaves strangely and pleads with Anna to stay the night with her. Reluctantly, Anna agrees, giving Ellen a cross and insisting that God is on their side. Back at Albin's office, he reveals they're dealing with an undead plague bearer, the vile vampire Nosferatu. Ellen, meanwhile, wakes from another nightmare to find herself face to face with Nosferatu. He tries to convince her that she's no longer part of humanity, claiming she was the one who summoned him from the depths of darkness long ago. Ellen confesses that she did call upon him in her youth, and they were once entwined in a dark bond, one that ended when she married Thomas. Now she insists she's moved on and no longer needs him. Orlick, enraged, gives her an ultimatum: come to him, or he will destroy everything she loves. Ellen refuses, repeatedly, vehemently, unwaveringly. When she wakes, she's relieved to find it was just another nightmare, until she notices Anna is no longer beside her. Panicked, Ellen searches the room only to discover Anna on the floor, screaming as rats feast on her. People across the city are falling ill and dying mysteriously from the plague. Friedrich, who has always refused to believe in the existence of vampires, now finds himself questioning how to save his wife. He's overwhelmed by the chaos unleashed in just a few days, all seemingly tied to Ellen and her husband Thomas. In a moment of frustration, he sends them away. At home, Ellen confronts Thomas, reminding him that he had warned her not to travel. She asks him point blank if he signed a document from the Count that would dissolve their marriage in exchange for a bag of gold. Thomas insists he thought it was merely payment for the land he sold to the Count, and swears he would never betray her. The argument escalates, and Ellen begins to shake uncontrollably. At that moment, she becomes possessed once again by Nosferatu. Recognizing the signs, Thomas tries to drive the demon out of her through a passionate act of intimacy. Afterward, Ellen regains consciousness and Thomas holds her tightly in his arms. The following night, Orlick decides to assert his power by first devouring Friedrich's children. But he doesn't stop there. After Friedrich buries his children and his wife, he finally accepts the grim reality that Nosferatu exists. Albin proposes a plan, an expedition with Wilhelm and Thomas to decapitate Orlick while he rests at Schloss Grunewald. Through his occult research, Albin has discovered that Nosferatu can only be truly destroyed by the willing sacrifice of a pure maiden, and Ellen is the only one fit for this role. Friedrich, consumed by grief over the loss of his wife and children, visits their graves in the cemetery. In a twisted moment of despair, he violates his wife's corpse before succumbing to the plague himself. Before von Franz and the others arrive, Friedrich is already dead. To purify the cemetery, they set the bodies ablaze. Determined to press on, the group decides to carry out their expedition immediately. Meanwhile, Ellen summons Orlick to her chambers. The group eventually locates the coffin they believe holds Orlick. Thomas opens it and stabs the body inside, only to discover it's not Orlick, but Nock lying in his place. Through Nock's revelations, Thomas realizes the expedition was a diversion. He rushes back to save Ellen, while von Franz recites prayers and burns the crypt to the ground. Orlick arrives at Ellen's chambers to find her waiting for him. She accepts his marriage vows, and soon after, he consummates their union in a gruesome act, feasting on her as they engage in horrifying intimacy. By the next morning, Orlick begins to feel a strange indifference and considers leaving, but Ellen urges him to stay, oblivious to the approaching daylight. Thomas arrives just in time to find Ellen on the brink of death. He holds her hand as she succumbs to exsanguination, her sacrifice bringing an end to the plague and the curse of Nosferatu.